Number one, Marvin Gaye was known as the Prince of Soul, a voice so smooth it felt like velvet against the ears. Through his music, he taught the world how to love deeply, how to feel pain honestly, and how to speak out against injustice. He wasn't merely a singer. He was a messenger of emotion and truth. Tracks like What's Going On didn't just top charts. They defined an era, merging sensuality with spirituality in a way that remains unmatched. He was celebrated across the globe, financially successful, and widely regarded as a musical genius. Yet behind the global admiration and success, Marvin's private life was anything but peaceful. The most devastating part of his story is not simply that he died too soon, but that his life was taken by the very man who brought him into the world. This is a tragic tale of a father consumed by resentment and a son crushed by lifelong emotional wounds. This investigation uncovers 10 of the most heartbreaking cases in music history, where legendary artists were betrayed and killed by those closest to them, their own families or inner circles. Our story begins in Washington, D.C. Inside a home dominated by fear and control, Marvin Gaye was a preacher who preached righteousness but ruled his household with violence. He demanded perfection and punished even the smallest mistakes with beatings. Despite presenting himself as a man of faith, he lived a deeply contradictory life, known for excessive drinking and secret behaviors that conflicted with his public image. From the start, he harbored bitterness toward his son. As Marvin's talent blossomed, his father's jealousy intensified. He constantly belittled him, insisting his voice meant nothing and that he would never succeed. History proved him wrong. Marvin Gaye rose to international stardom and even altered the spelling of his last name, adding an E in an attempt to emotionally distance himself from his father. But no matter how famous he became, the psychological grip never loosened. By 1983, Marvin's life was unraveling. Despite the massive success of sexual healing, he was battling deep depression, paranoia, and a severe cocaine addiction. He moved back into his parents' Los Angeles home initially to help care for his mother, Alberta, during her recovery from surgery. Instead of healing, the house became a battleground. His father, frail but still filled with anger, resented his son's presence. Their fights were frequent, loud, and vicious. Everyone around them saw the danger, but no one was able to intervene. The most tragic irony came months before Marvin's death. As a Christmas gift, Marvin bought his father a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver to protect the household. Without realizing it, he had handed his father the weapon that would end his life. On April 1st, 1984, just one day before Marvin's 45th birthday, the tension finally exploded. A minor dispute over a missing insurance document spiraled out of control. Marvin Gaye Sr. began screaming at Alberta. From his bedroom, Marvin shouted for his father to stop. When the shouting continued, Marvin entered the room and confronted him. According to his mother, Marvin shoved and kicked his father, an eruption of decades of bottled-up abuse. Alberta managed to separate them, and Marvin returned to his bedroom, believing the confrontation was finished. It was not already there. Marvin Gaye Sr. walked calmly down the hallway, entered his son's room, raised the revolver Marvin had given him, and fired. The first bullet pierced Marvin's heart. Then he stepped closer and fired again into his shoulder. It was not a moment of panic. It was deliberate. Marvin Gaye, the man who sang Mercy, Mercy Me, was shown no mercy by his own blood. Police arrived to find him lifeless on his bedroom floor. His father sat quietly outside. When asked if he loved his son, he responded coldly, "Let's say I didn't dislike him." At trial, his defense argued that a brain tumor impaired his judgment. He pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter and received probation with a suspended sentence. He never served a single day behind bars. He passed away in a nursing facility in 1998. Marvin's final words to his brother were chilling. "I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself." A haunting conclusion to a life shaped by love, fame, jealousy, and unbearable pain. Number 2. Lee Morgan in the smoky jazz clubs of 1960s New York. Few musicians shine brighter than Lee Morgan. A trumpet prodigy with raw fire and effortless cool, he stunned audiences and shared stages with legends like John Coltrane. His hit The Sidewinder cemented his place in jazz history. But brilliance in jazz often walks hand in hand with chaos. One cold night, Lee Morgan lay on the floor of a club while the woman who had saved him from heroin addiction stood over him in horror. Helen Moore, overwhelmed by regret, screamed apologies as his life slipped away. She had destroyed the very man she rebuilt. When police arrived, Helen surrendered the weapon without resistance. Lee Morgan was pronounced dead at just 33 years old. A life rescued from addiction ended suddenly through emotional dependency and jealousy. Helen was charged with murder, but spent years in psychiatric care before serving a brief prison sentence. She lived the rest of her life in obscurity, passing away in 1996, her full truth never told. This case forces us to question the thin line between love, control, and obsession. Number 3. Felix Pappalardi. Felix Pappalardi was a towering figure in rock music, a producer, musician, and innovator who helped shape heavy rock. He worked closely with Cream and was often called their unofficial fourth member. As part of Mountain, he gave the world Mississippi Queen. Brilliant and classically trained, Felix understood music at a rare level, but intelligence could not protect him from a toxic marriage. His wife, Gail Collins, was deeply entwined in his career, writing lyrics, designing album art, and sharing creative control. They were a power couple. Privately, the relationship was volatile. Friends described Gail as controlling, and their marriage was fueled by drugs, ego, and jealousy. When Felix began planning to leave her for another woman, Gail lost control. On April 17, 1983, inside their Manhattan apartment, Gail retrieved a .38 caliber Derringer, another gifted weapon, and fired at Felix's neck. The bullet severed his carotid artery. He died at 43. Though charged with murder, Gail was convicted only of criminally negligent homicide and served less than 2 years. She later moved to Mexico, dying in 2013 without ever confessing. Felix's music lives on, but his death remains a warning about creative partnerships turning lethal. Number 4. Selena Quintanilla. Selena Quintanilla Perez was more than a singer. She was a movement. The Queen of Tejano music stood on the edge of worldwide superstardom, breaking language barriers and uniting cultures with her voice, style, and warmth. She was preparing to release her first English language album, Dreaming of You, a project destined to turn her into a global icon. But at the very moment her future burned brightest, it was destroyed by the person trusted to protect her career. That person was Yolanda Saldivar. Yolanda entered Selena's life as a devoted fan. A registered nurse by profession, She aggressively pursued Selena's family, convincing her father, Abraham Quintanilla, to allow her to start the official fan club. Once inside, Yolanda embedded herself deeply. She became the fan club president, then gradually gained more control, eventually managing Selena's fashion boutiques. Selena trusted her completely. She called her a mom. Yolanda had keys to the stores, access to finances, and the full confidence of a young star who believed loyalty meant love. But behind that devotion was deception. By early 1995, warning signs emerged. Fans complained about missing merchandise. Money vanished from the boutiques. Abraham investigated and uncovered proof of embezzlement. Yolanda had been stealing from the very family that embraced her. On March 9, 1995, she was confronted and fired. She was warned to return the missing records or face police action. Instead of walking away, Yolanda became desperate. Selena was her entire identity. Without her, erased. On March 31, 1995, Selena agreed to meet Yolanda alone at a Days Inn motel in Corpus Christi to retrieve the documents. It was a fatal act of kindness. Inside room 158, the confrontation escalated. When Selena turned to leave, Yolanda pulled out a .38 caliber revolver and fired one hollow-point bullet into Selena's back, severing a critical artery near her heart. Amazingly, Selena ran. Bleeding heavily, she made it nearly 400 feet to the motel lobby, collapsing while naming her killer with her final breath. She was, just 23 years old. Yolanda later surrendered after a long standoff. In October 1995, she was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Selena's legacy only grew stronger, but the loss... Number 5. Judith Barcy. This is one of the most devastating stories in entertainment history. Judith Barcy was a child star whose voice defined innocence. She was Ducky in The Land Before Time and the singing voice of Anne Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. By age 10, she was supporting her entire family financially. But behind the studio lights, Judith lived in constant fear. Her father, Joseph Barcy, was an alcoholic plagued by paranoia and rage. As Judith's success increased, his jealousy turned violent. He threatened her repeatedly, once holding a knife to her throat and warning that if they ever tried to leave, he would kill them. The trauma manifested physically. Judith began pulling out her own eyelashes and even her pet's whiskers. Her mother begged Child Protective Services for help, but no lasting protection was provided. On July 25, 1988, Joseph shot Judith in her sleep. He then murdered her mother, Maria, set the house on fire, and took his own life. Judith was only 10 years old. Her gravestone reads, "Yep, yep, yep, yep," a haunting echo of a voice silenced far too soon. Al Jackson Jr. Al Jackson Jr. was the heartbeat of Memphis soul, as the drummer behind countless hits for Booker T. And the MGS Otis Redding and Al Green. His personal life was marked by turmoil. Months before his death, his wife Barbara had already shot him during an argument. On October 1, 1975, Al returned home to find intruders waiting. He was beaten and executed with 5 shots. The crime was officially ruled a robbery, but suspicion lingered for decades that the attack was arranged by someone he trusted, possibly his wife, after learning he planned to leave her. The human timekeeper died in silence, but his rhythm still lives in every soul record he touched. Number 7. Peter Tosh. Peter Tosh was a revolutionary. A founding member of the Wailers, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Bob Marley and Bunny Wailer, preaching resistance, justice, and freedom through reggae. His murder was not political. It was personal. In 1987, Dennis Aleppo Laban, someone Tosh had previously helped and trusted, entered his home demanding money. At trial, Laban claimed he was framed, but eyewitness testimony was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. Peter Tosh's death remains one of reggae's deepest wounds, a betrayal born of envy, not ideology. Number 8. Brian Jones. Brian Jones was the founder of the Rolling Stones, the creative architect behind their early sound. But by 1969, addiction and isolation had pushed him out of the band he created. At his country estate, Coshford Farm, he lived with Frank Thorogood, a builder hired for renovations. Over time, Thorogood became more than an employee. He felt entitled to Brian's money and lifestyle. On July 2, 1969, after an argument over unpaid work, Brian went for a midnight swim. Minutes later, he was found dead at the bottom of the pool. His death was ruled accidental. But years later, Thorogood reportedly confessed to holding Brian underwater during a rage-filled fight. No charges were ever filed. Brian Jones didn't simply fade away. He was extinguished by someone living under his roof. Number 8. Brian Jones was the founder of the Rolling Stones, the creative architect behind their early sound. But by 1969, addiction and isolation had pushed him out of the band he created. At his country estate, Coachford Farm, he lived with Frank Thorogood, a builder hired for renovations. Over time, Thorogood became more than an employee. He felt entitled to Brian's money and lifestyle. On July 2, 1969, after an argument over unpaid work, Brian went for a midnight swim. Minutes later, he was found dead at the bottom of the pool. His death was ruled accidental. But years later, Thorogood reportedly confessed to holding Brian underwater during a rage-filled fight. No charges were ever filed. Brian Jones didn't simply fade away. He was extinguished by someone living under his roof. Number 10. William G.T. Howard. We end with a case made terrifying not by conspiracy, but by how trivial it was. William G. Howard was the lead singer of the Dramatics, the unmistakable voice behind In the Rain. By 2000, he lived quietly in Detroit with his wife and stepson, Co Walker. On February 22, a simple argument broke out over loud music. Howard asked Co to turn the volume down. Co refused. Words escalated into rage. Co grabbed a gun and fired. The soul legend collapsed in his own living room. He later died at the hospital. Co Walker was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. A legendary voice was silenced over a stereo volume dispute. Final reflection: these stories reveal a brutal truth. The greatest danger to many legends wasn't fame. It was love turned into control. Trust turned into betrayal. If this journey into music's darkest chapters moved you, hit like, share this video, and subscribe for the next investigation. Subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss a new video.